welcome to the launch of the second season of the Discovery Museum Speaker Series. My name is Neil Gordon and I'm the CEO at the Discovery Museums. The Discovery Museum Speaker Series hopes to create engaging conversations around creativity, learning, and the future of science education. We hope to connect our community with leaders in the fields of science, technology, and education to discuss the important topics that impact our children, our families, and our world. We invite you tonight to join in that conversation. By way of thanking you all for coming, I can tell you we're all pleased and excited to get a seat here tonight. The registration for tonight's event was filled up in rather a matter of hours, which only goes to prove that apparently Tony Rayo is a rock star. So we're thrilled to have him with us tonight, and we'll talk more about him in a second. I do have a few things to say about the museum and the folks who've made it possible for us to be here tonight. So the Discovery Museums is all about the importance of investing in and supporting our most important resource, which is our children. And we know that our collective future holds as many yet unknown challenges, and it will be the job of that next generation to creatively and cooperatively confront and tackle the many issues that they will confront. Our simple mission as a museum is to inspire the natural curiosity and creativity in our children that will help them prepare to live engaging, happy, and fulfilling lives in an ever-changing and expanding world. Children represent only a small percentage of our population, but they are 100% of our future. Many of you know the Discovery Museums is that place where that green dinosaur is out front, and your kids couldn't let you ride by it without begging you to stop. Or maybe you know it as that place where on the third consecutive rainy day, we help save your life. You know, in fact, we see our role is hopefully a little bit deeper than that and broader. We seek to advance the efforts that highlight the value of play and open-ended experiences in children's lives. Many of you are familiar with the decline in play in kids' lives. We actively engage kids in what's come to be known as STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, because those are the critical skills that the next generation will need. We work hard, and I mean very hard, at reaching kids and families who, because of either economics or culture or personal challenges, really don't have access to the great and sort of formative learning experiences that museums represent. So I'm not going to cite a lot of statistics tonight or talk about the awards that the museum has won, but I will tell you that we hope and we believe that our impact on families goes far and beyond simply being that rainy day destination. I hope as we're looking ahead at a future which has pretty ambitious plans to renovate and expand the museum, to make our facilities and to take advantage of our outdoor spaces, the abutting conservation lands, and to begin to get kids back outdoors, and to give families even more access to sort of our signature approaches to learning, that you'll have the chance to talk to us and learn more about all of those opportunities. Evenings like tonight don't happen without a lot of support. We're really fortunate tonight to be joined by members of our board who are very instrumental in helping us succeed. Bill Ryan, who's our newly incoming board chair. Lee Stuntz, who's our former board chair, are both here. Wendy Baker, who I'm going to introduce in a second. Russ Layton, one of our board members. Joan Appleton, a former board member, is here tonight as well. Did I miss anybody in that list? We want to thank them for all of their support in making things like this happen. Tonight's event, as all of our events have been, is co-sponsored by the MIT Club of Boston. Bob Ferrara helps make that happen, as does Renata Pomponi, who's also locally. We are hosted here tonight by the congregation Beth Elohim, and we thank them again for their generous hosting of us here tonight. The food is generously provided by Idlewild Farms, Dina Ferrara, who makes that possible, and we'd like to also thank Rich Napoli and his family for their generous support and being longtime supporters of the museum as well. Tonight's talk is being filmed by our friends at Acton TV and will be rebroadcast on cable in case you want to go home and you didn't take good notes of all the things that Tony has to say tonight. I want to thank the generous businesses that have been charter sponsors for the speaker series. Middlesex Savings Bank is our lead sponsor. Advocate sponsors Alexander Aronson Fenning CPAs, EKG Network, Erlin Construction, McWalter Volunteer Insurance Agency, Seacrest and Bloom LLC, and Sorrento's Brick Oven Pizza. I also want to give a special thanks to our premier sponsor, Enterprise Bank, and take a moment to invite Wendy Baker, who's the Vice President of Enterprise, to say hi to you all. Wendy.
Thank you. Thank you, Neil. Thank you very much. Enterprise Bank, who are they? Well, we've been in Acton for just 5 years. I remember when I first came to open the Enterprise branch. I looked around and I looked for the nonprofit that everyone was talking about. That nonprofit was the Discovery Museums. So I must tell you, I was so impressed when I first came to the museum. I met, at that time, the new CEO, Neil Gordon. I met many of the staff members, and I was so impressed. It was my mission to be a part of that board. Fortunately for me, through a little committee work and a few other great things that happened, I did become a member of the board of the Discovery Museums. I am so proud of that, and I am proud of the relationship that Enterprise Bank has with the Discovery Museums. Thank you all for being here. Good night.
Thanks, Wendy. We're really very fortunate as a museum to have a lot of support from Wendy and other businesses in our community. It's you know, any nonprofit, and particularly a small museum like ours, is a product of the support that we get from our community, and all of you coming out tonight are part of that, and the support that we get from the sponsors that I mentioned and from Enterprise is really very crucial. So tonight, our focus is on the social and emotional health of children, particularly of boys. Children who are well-grounded, appropriately mature, able to work with others, able to be joyful and playful, they'll be successful learners, and they'll be those great and creative leaders that we're going to need for our future. We're incredibly pleased tonight to have someone with us who can offer great insight on the social and emotional state of our children, and what we all know, what we will know to be the keys to helping them be successful as they grow up. Dr. Anthony Rayo is a nationally known expert in child psychology, appearing regularly on TV news programs and in magazines. He founded a pediatric psychology practice in Massachusetts known for helping children without relying solely on medications. Dr. Rayo holds a PhD in psychology from Vanderbilt University and trained as a pediatric psychologist at Boston Children's Hospital. For more than 20 years, Dr. Rayo worked in the Department of Psychiatry at Children's Hospital and served as an instructor at Harvard Medical School. Dr. Rayo has been featured on documentaries, interviewed for articles in the New Yorker, Parents Magazine, the Boston Globe, the Washington Times, among many other places. His letters and opinions have appeared in Newsweek, Scientific American, the New York Times, and New York Magazine. Most importantly, perhaps, Dr. Rayo consults with families all over the country and has lectured at numerous colleges. He regularly presents at conferences and at parenting groups and conducts workshops for professionals who work with children. I know I talked to some of you out there before who said you've heard Dr. Rayo speak before and came tonight just to hear him talk again. His book, The Way of Boys, Promoting the Social and Emotional Development of Young Boys, is about the crisis in American boyhood. I should point out that we do have the books available in the lobby. Some of you picked them up before the talk, and they will be available, and Dr. Rayo will be signing afterwards. Personally, I was really pleased. Recently, I got to take Dr. Rayo on a tour of the Discovery Museums. And as we walked around, he told me many stories of recognizing exhibits, not from having seen them before, but from the stories that children in his practice had told him about the exhibits in the museum. You know, that felt like good karma to me. It felt like here was somebody who was really going to connect with us, with the story, and with the kids who make use of the museum. So I'm really thrilled to have Tony Rayo with us tonight, and please join me in welcoming him.
Good evening, folks. Thank you so much. It's a wonderful group tonight. I'm just going to start off, but I'm going to alert you to one word up here, learning. See it at the end of the title, right there, learning. How do you know when boys are learning? Do we need standardized tests? Do we need longer school days? What do we need? How do we know they're really making it? It's all in the eyes. It's all in the face. It's all in the body. Look at this guy. He's got his hands up, open body, mouth agape. Magical. These are some photos that were lent to me kindly from the traveling science workshops. Look at this kid. You know, it makes you wonder why, or how maybe J.K. Rowling got her idea for the boy wizard, looking at something like this. You know, he's playing with some magnets up on a stick. Again, look at the eyes, look at the mouth open, look at the body language. They're learning. This is what we should be measuring. This guy is crossing over 3 desks, breaking boundaries, pushing the limits. You know, I don't know about you, when I see smoke, my instinct is to move back. I want to get my face in there. I want to know what this smells like. This is exactly what learning is about, particularly in younger boys. It's multi-sensory. I've been watching episodes of Breaking Bad, and frankly, this is like disturbing to me. I don't know. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. It just like... And this is my favorite. This is my favorite. Just the sheer joy, that moment when you just can't help it, and you just, oh, it just is so great. This is actually in the museum, correct? Yeah. And you know, when you come into the museum, particularly the first building, which is an old Victorian, although it's true of the Science Center as well, it's honestly, I mean, this is just a piece of what you see. It's like a Rube Goldberg, Willy Wonka dream. I mean, it's just, there's so much going on, and it's all materials and things that I think a child could look at and say, Mom, Dad, I think we can make this at home. And the accessibility is absolutely tremendous. You know, so I look at things like this and just my heart warms, and I know that learning is taking place. I wish we could stop the lecture right now. There's still some wine out there, I think. And we could just enjoy that, but I fear that we can't. A couple of years ago, I would have not used the word trouble, but I can easily use it now. And when I first published the book, it was in 2009, then 2010, the paperback. I would have thought that maybe we had crested, but it turns out that we're not. My journey is, I started working with kids back in the mid-1980s, down in the South, Vanderbilt University at the medical school. Pediatrics, behavioral clinic, along with psychiatrists. There were medical students, psychology trainees like myself. We saw lots of kids. We didn't see just boys. And among those kids, we didn't often diagnose serious things, and we'd send them on for therapy, or we'd talk to the pediatricians, maybe some tutoring, whatever. And it all seemed to work out. Over the years, what we saw was an increased, substantial, exponential increase of boys being referred to clinics across the country. That's what got me interested in this project that led to the book, which was, is this just in my practice? Why am I seeing a lot of boys? Is it because I'm a male therapist? They want to go see a boy therapist? Well, that's true for some of them. It turned out it was happening everywhere. And diagnoses not only were climbing among boys, they were climbing among younger and younger boys. So here are just some things to keep in mind, some of the pieces that I talk about. It was during this period, mid-1980s, for about 10 to 15 years, that the ADHD revolution happened in children. It had first happened in adults. Diagnosed 3 times more in boys, but what a lot of people don't realize is that it's about 6 or 7 times more in clinic settings, like my own school psychology office, clinical practices. It has now become the most common pediatric complaint. If you're a pediatrician, you know what I'm talking about. I talk to pediatricians all the time. It's exactly the main issue, front and center, in most of the appointments. Now, this grouping of things down here is a little bit more about learning in general. Learning disability rates are up. Dropout rates at high school are increased, mostly for boys. And college admission rates are shifting. Young women are making it to college more than young men are. And that's great, and that's good for them, and that gap had to close, and we don't want to do anything about that. We want to encourage it. But the guys aren't getting in, and the guys that are getting in, they're not staying. A lot of them are having a hard time. Just the sheer pressure of getting them up and through a very accelerated coursework of years and years of achievement, I think that's why we're seeing a lot of gap years being talked about. It's probably not a bad idea. Give them a breather, give them a break. This one, school expulsion rates. Picture in your mind for a moment an expelled kid. It's a guy, right? Most likely it's a guy. How old do you think? You know? Teens? How's he dressed? You know? Inner city wear or leather jackets? You know, what are you thinking, right? Okay, here they come. Hold on to your wallets and purses. Preschool boys are most likely to be expelled in the United States at a rate of 4 to 5 times more than girls. They're not even getting through the door. The learning is being stopped right from the get-go. And that's because most of these schools are private schools, and they can toss out kids that aren't learning. What you have to remember, too, is that everything's excelling. Kids are going to school earlier, and, you know, you've heard orange is the new black. Well, turns out that, you know, kindergarten's the new first grade. Everything's excelled. So how did we get here? What are the trends that are causing this, and what can we do to help these kids? I use the word trends because I want to start to think about what's happening in all these boys that are getting referred to clinics that aren't making it into schools and getting kicked out. The initial assumption is there must be something wrong with their brain. There must be something wrong with them. That's exactly where we start. That's the first place we go. What about looking at the trends around us? But before I do that, we have to understand how boys are different than girls. And before we do that, I don't want you leaving tonight saying, well, Dr. Rayo said that, you know, boys are great in spatial relationships, so, you know, we're not going to get our daughter a bicycle this week. You know, don't take anything I say as being able to be generalized to all boys and all girls. So the boy species, let's be scientific about it, we're talking about the Discovery Museums. Where are they from? Mars and Venus? Where? Well, that's a reference to John Gray's book of 1992, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. And it didn't have a ton of science in it, but boy, did it hit a national nerve. It's actually, from what I last heard, maybe one of the most popular non-fiction books ever published. So there's something about that and how we see and how we believe the differences between males and females. But I want you to remember something. While there are some differences and they are real, the bottom line is that the differences within our groups, say gender, male versus female, they far outweigh the differences between groups. Now we've got enough people, we could actually do this, but we're not going to. We could put all the males on one side, all the females on the other. We could measure height. And males will be taller on average in that group than the females. But look at me, I'm not the tallest guy in the room. There'll be many females that'll be taller than me. That goes to show you that, sure, within our group, when we average it, we have a finding. And it looks different than that other group across the way. But we can't take it and apply it to any one individual. Now with that said, I want to run you through what I think are some of the most critical early developmental things that separate boys from girls, that make them unique, not disordered. Eye contact. Boys from day one. Neonatal research shows they just aren't looking at their moms in exactly the same amount that they do, that girls do with their moms. It's just there's a difference right off from the start. In fact, some studies will show that neonate males, little boys, are more interested in moving parts or mobiles of pieces of faces rather than their own mom's eyes. So right there you're starting to get a clue as to why you struggle a lot, say, with early your sons versus your daughters. They're not listening. Not looking at you, they're not listening. Now here, It turns out that all males, so it's not just boys. I wish I could say different. Turns out, at 1,000 hertz, cycles per second, measure of sound waves, which is where, coincidentally, hearing of language takes place. Males are not as sensitive as females. It explains why girls, by say a year and a half at 18 months, have about twice the vocabulary of little boys. Twice the vocabulary. If you're running a race, that's a lot. If you're halfway behind, that's a lot. So right from the get-go, not looking, not able to pick up words and process them as easily, and they don't sit still. Motor activity, even in utero, is higher for males than females. And if you take them from toddler on and you just attach these little things that measure where they go, lo and behold, they move more under natural circumstances. Look at that list. I'm not looking at you, I'm not listening, and I don't sit still. That's exactly what teachers complain about all day long that lead to that statistic of boys being the #1 expelled group. That's exactly it right there. Right from the beginning, their development isn't about being indoors. It isn't about sitting for long periods of time. It's not about looking up and listening, and it's not about social cooperative play. Let's move it up a little bit. This is the age that we'll start to see these kids come into the museum. Speech and language, by the time they're around 6, 7 years old, sort of first grade, the boys on average are about a year behind the girls. That's a lot. A year behind in your language skills at 6 or 7 is probably at the adult level about 5 or 10 years difference in some skill. It's a huge developmental difference. Visual spatial thing is what they are better at, but they don't get a lot of that, do they? They'll get it at the museums. They're not going to do any hands-on sorts of things at school, and if they do, they tend to be time limited. Or safety is a concern. But that's how they learn. They explore, they touch, they push the boundaries of things. Social cooperative skills are absolutely non-existent in boys. Oh, don't be fooled when they give you that look and, you know, there's something behind it. But for the most part, they just don't run up and try to demonstrate that to you, whereas younger girls of the same age range will. I mean, they have them. They tend to be a bit dormant. They do arrive later on. But the ways in which boys show their connections are quite different. It's more through parallel play. It's more through, I'm having this experience alongside you. And you know, you may have one kid in the sandbox who's, you know, doing the dinosaur sounds and eating little plastic cars. Well, he's not eating the plastic cars, the dinosaur is. And the other one is working, you know, with you know, Obi-Wan Kenobi in a battle to the end. And it looks like they're not connecting at all, but they're sharing the experience. And you know, a lot of grown men will say, in fact, that they like experiences with other males where they're kind of side by side. And there's not a lot of verbal back and forth. Response to stress. This is an interesting one. Explains why a lot of kids are having a hard time these days, these boys in particular. When you stress boys by putting them into small, tight spaces for long periods of time, they react with aggression. Girls tend to use their social cooperative skills to get through the stress. So if you add another kid or two to each classroom, which is the trend over the last couple of years, even one kid, that's why we're seeing more and more kids getting diagnosed with disorders and learning problems. All right, we know that they're different from girls. Are they different from one another? There are boy types, and I think that they influence learning. I want to outline them for you. Over the years, I've come up with 4 that have worked for me. This is how I think. I'm not saying they're correct all the time, but these are the 4 categories of boy types. And as you're thinking about them, you may even be wondering, if you're thinking about the museums, for example, what types of things will certain boys gravitate toward? What sorts of things? How are their minds composed, designed, built, in order to interact with the world? Now, these are not mutually exclusive categories. And these aren't completely just for boys, never for girls. We can see parts of ourselves in all of these. The active-aggressive one, clearly, is the most typical type of boy we think of. On the move, not waiting turn, grab before saying anything, assertive. Kind of opposite to that is that shy, vigilant kid. Off to the side, maybe watching the social group as it's running through things, but kind of apprehensive to jump in. The introverted thinker could be in the middle of the group and doesn't know what's going on. They're working on something, they don't care, they're in their own little world, they're hunkering down. And that social empathizer, this is a tricky group to understand, but just think of it as a boy who's loaded with social and emotional interest. These kids tend to pick up on cues quick. They tend to really get in there and mix it up. They really love emotional stimulation. Sometimes they get themselves emotionally stimulated, but you know they're in the room. These are the kids that are going to be class clown-like, get in there, take over, but they're very unique, and you'll see why in a minute, because what's the point of having all of these? Well, it turns out they're skill sets. The first one's the hunter-warrior. The active-aggressive kid's the one that's going to go out and, you know, save you if, God forbid, something happens. You know, risk. They'll take risks. They're not going to think about it. They're going to live more in the moment. They're not fearful of stimulation. Shy, vigilant kid, very different. So what are they doing off to the side while they're looking? They're observing. They're looking at trends. They're recording. These are scouts. The introverted thinker is really locked down and hunkered on probably materials or manipulating objects. That's our like scientist, our maker, our doer. You have to block everything out in order to do that. The social empathizer, again, tricky category. Sometimes they're performers. They demand attention. They want to be in front and perform, and they enjoy that sort of social thing. Sometimes they're empathetic and they can come to your rescue and they can heal you, they can nurture you. All sounds great, right? Ask yourself, where's your kid? You see maybe a certain amount of him in this part and that part. When I was younger, I was more of these middle ones. As I've gotten older, I've been able to do more of these. It can change over time. But we do see them as pretty reliable, at least I think, in the very early years. Here's the rub. Each one of these can be a disorder. All you have to think about is, under certain circumstances, or whoever is judging these kids, if you stress them enough, that hunter-warrior becomes an ADHD kid, mostly because of the H, the hyperactivity. The ADD kids fall a little bit more somewhere in here. Shy, vigilant kids off to the side, they tend to get diagnosed with anxiety issues. The introverted thinker could be on the spectrum, the more Asperger, an autistic kind of thing. And that social empathizer, mood disorders, swings of, you know, some anxiety, but a little bit of down, sort of bipolar possibly. And the line between the skill and the disorder, I mean, is blurred. It doesn't even exist. There are no objective tests for any of these things. So be cautious. And maybe some of your kids have some of these disorders, and maybe they've been reliably and clinically determined. That's fine. But those scales or those tests are just checklists. And they're nothing more than criteria that we find in the DSM, Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, and we just attach numbers to them. They're not reality. They're not objective. It's not like getting a blood test and saying, oh, look at the blood sugar level. This person may have diabetes. It's nothing like that at all. Here are some examples. A boy that was used to learning things his own way and playing outside by himself all day long, sitting in school was pure misery. This describes most of the boys that come through my office. And it's Thomas Edison, the great scientist of America, who couldn't stay in school. He could not learn in school. His mom had to teach him what she could. She was a teacher. And he had to sort of do it all on his own way. I used to never be able to get along at school, he said. I was always at the foot of the class, which meant the bottom. I used to feel that the teachers did not sympathize with me, and he had that right. Where would he be, this guy? Well, let's see. Definitely would be in that scientist, maker, doer type, right? But you know what? I've read a little bit about him, and he also had some anxiety, or at least I would say in the social realm. He didn't really go out a lot. He didn't like the public that much. He used to hang out a lot with Henry Ford. And they and their respective wives would winter, if you will, down in Florida. I've been to, in Fort Myers, I don't know if you've ever seen it. Anybody ever been there to see the, yeah, you've got to bring your kids to see this. There's a tour of the house, which is beautiful, but you know what, bypass that. Go to the lab. They have a lab that literally he just could have walked right out of. And it'll just mesmerize you how this man thought. And he had all these scientists with him, and they were working on all sorts of things. And we're talking old school. You know, pulleys and weights and glass vials filled with liquids, as if he just stepped out. It's absolutely astonishing. Gives you the sense of what the brain is like for these types of kids, these types of boys. Here's another one. The boy, not yet 6, had difficulty reading and writing and was wholly unable to comprehend arithmetic. It's not a good sign, right? He was petrified when he had to go to school. I see that all the time. Anxiety climbs in these boys because, whatever reason, they just aren't keeping up with the other kids, not learning at the same rate. The anxiety then turns out to be acting out. That's how they get to me. At his desk, the child could not concentrate. No matter what the teacher was instructing, he would devote himself to drawing. This is Pablo Picasso. Again, another great example. There are endless examples of these. So, what kind of guy is he? Definitely the performer, healer, nurturer. Just tons of emotion running through him. Wouldn't call him much of a healer or nurturer. He's more like a womanizer. And I was at a talk recently down in Orlando, and one of the people said, you know what? It still fits because you have all of this knowledge, social skills, depends on how you use it. And he made a good point. He also was a bit of a hunter-warrior, incredibly aggressive guy. So anyways, I just want to show you those so you get a sense of sort of how this plays out. And we're going to return to this in the next couple of minutes. Now here are the modern trends, and I'm going to outline 3 that are really hitting boys hard. High competition is just pervasive. We all feel it. It is all over the culture, and it's been here for years, and it is only climbing higher. There is a major movement indoors. You know, if you think about it, a lot of the homes got bigger and bigger and bigger as kids and all of us got more sedentary. We stayed indoors more. We created more space for ourselves. We are outdoors less and less, and kids in particular are suffering from that. The boys who need that high motor movement are the ones most in trouble. And the technology overload. I like tech, but it is, you know, we're in the middle of a technology revolution. We don't know where it's stopping. If we're in the middle of it, it's just the beginning of it. We're in the middle of very strange times, and nobody can predict. And this would have been the equivalent of horse and buggy days and no electricity, and all of a sudden, people are talking about flight and engines and cars and refrigeration and electricity and electric lights. And it was just astonishing to those people. If you read what people said about those days, how frightened they were and how fast the change took place, well, the change is crazy now. It would be the equivalent of going from horse and buggy to a jet in probably a year or 2. That's how fast the technology is running. And it's having its effect on boys. We'll show you when we get there. Higher competition. This is a very seriously competitive little dude. And how do you know? Because he's wearing first cleats. There is a company in Seattle, I believe, or Oregon, where you can purchase for your child cleats between the ages of 0, I love that, 0 and 2. Now I came across this because I was looking for stuff for my nephew, you know, after first, second birthday. And, you know, I'm a psychologist. I should know better. When he was born, I ran to the hospital to see, you know, my sister and her husband and my new nephew. And what did I do? I bought a Red Sox cap on the way in. Right? And I'm thinking about these talks I do, and I'm thinking, I'm like, look at the cap, look at the B. This is a good team. We have better owners now. I want you to know. We're going to be winning more than what I remember as a kid. Look at the cap. You know, indoctrinate early. Wear those things. I said, you know, and then that I didn't even think about until I was about to purchase these. I thought, well, those will look kind of cute anyways, hanging from your rearview mirror. But it's like, wait a minute. And I kind of stopped and I paused and I thought, you know, like, we're infusing so much of our expectations onto children. It's a natural thing anyways. There's nothing wrong with it either. Except that, you know, what message is this? I mean, this guy can't walk. What does he need cleats for? And we're doing that in the culture. You're seeing in earlier and earlier ages, adult themes, clothing, gaming, all just sort of trickling down earlier and earlier. Now, the problem is with boys, they love competition. And you can't eliminate it. Here are the reasons why they love it. It's kind of based on hierarchy. It's based on that zero-sum thing. I win, you lose. I got there first. Mine's the best. Order, position matter, and that category thing is what starts the whole thing with teams and mascots. And they really like the concrete nature of it. This is not social emotional. This is very primitive, but it's all based on outward observable things. Now there's some things that you can do. If you just think about offering all sorts of opportunities and all sorts of activities for your kids, you're probably going to find something that any boy will eventually be good at. You know, we tend to think of, for example, in team sports, you know, the top 5, you know, basketball, soccer, baseball, hockey, I'm forgetting one. Baseball, did I already do baseball? Football, thank you. Oh, yeah, well, no wonder after what happened this year. You know, so it's like we tend to think team sports. What about individual sports, where that may be a whole different kind of brain style for many boys who actually do better? And a lot of boys really suffer through those early years and don't have anywhere to go or anything to feel good at until they reach college. Now a little bit more in high school. So we just want to increase the range of things, so at least competition and success gets spread out a little bit. You can't eliminate it. You want to manage the stress of it. I came up with this thing called the rule of thirds. Didn't know what else to call it, but I think it kind of works. And this is how you can manage the stress of competition. If you're going to enter your young kid into a new activity, ask yourself this: how would you feel? You want to for about a third of the time you're in this brand new thing, you want to feel really good. You want to feel really relaxed. You want to feel like, oh, I've done this a million times. This is no big deal. Now, this is a trick with young kids because everything in the world is new to them. And maybe a third of the time with a little bit of effort and some work, yeah, I get it, and I get accomplishments and I feel good. If those first 2/3 are in place, then I can tolerate the stuff where I'm in over my head. Think of it as like an immersion program in a new country you've never been to, and just think about the brand new things you would be willing to do. And I know all of you are like, oh, what's the big deal? I would try anything. Yeah, okay, you want to do some like line stepping right now, or or do you want to like set something up completely where you embarrass yourself in front of everyone? That's what it's like with kids when we send them into brand new venues. So this rule of third, you can adjust for the type of boy. Let's go back to the type of boy. I think that the middle kids, they don't have a lot of confidence built. Remember, they're either shy, they're off to the side, or they're hunkered down in their own thing. So their confidence level is a little low. So I would say to them, keep them in things that you know they're going to have a higher rate of success. I think for these other outward guys, the aggressive and active kids, the social empathizers, they tend to have more confidence. They can actually tolerate a lot of new things. Second trend, migrating indoors. Since the 1970s, which is kind of like, a little bit of just past my era, kids started to lose some serious time in their lives, in their childhood. This is really the era in which this started to happen. 12 hours a week of their free time gone. Because we start scheduling them. We put them to school longer hours. A quarter of their play gone. Criminal, given that play is the work of the child, correct? It's how cognitive development proceeds. 50% drop, and this may be the biggest one that accounts for a lot of ADHD diagnosing, because we know high activity level is what boys need. Half of their outdoor unstructured time gone. These are the trends that are impacting boys now, and they are only getting worse. Now, what the museums do is that they have programs outdoors where they're permitting, and they're actually planning to make some incredible, and Neil's going to tell us about it after I speak, incredible outdoor, museum-oriented space. It's going to be spectacular. If the museums are not already on the map, they will seriously be on the map when this is finished. And they're going to be looking at ways that we learn and children learn outdoors. And I've been pushing with places like at Drumlin and others that do a fantastic job with this. How can we learn more and more outdoors? The science tends not to be in here. We study it in here, but a lot of the science is actually outside. Look at his shirt. I am why we can't have nice things. Yeah. Next trend, high-tech revolution. It is here. When I was doing some of these talks originally, I would have to say things like, listen, just keep them off the computer, unplug it. Yeah, those days are gone. This is someone addicted to computers. This is not a picture from the museums. I just want to let you know that. It's a little tongue-in-cheek, but it's the whole notion of boys in particular are very, very devoted to their games and can get very lost in that. The more social empathizing types of boys tend not to get as stuck in this world. Those middle two guys do. And sometimes those hunter-gatherer types can, but because they're so much invested in doing sort of high-activity things, they tend to get themselves outdoors more and tend to get involved in sports. So those middle two type boys are the boys that I really worry about. And when they go off to college and there's nobody there to tell them what to do, it can get really dark and bad, and a lot of them just don't make it. So here are some of the sobering statistics. I mean, we've heard these, and I'll bring one up at the end that you may not have yet heard of, but again, it was between 96 to 2008, threefold increase in the consumption of media, cable stations, and everything that became screen-oriented just exploded. 75% of teens have cell phones. This is an older statistic. There's a lot more than that. 1 in 3 teens text more than 100 times a day. It's probably higher than that. I will say, if your teen is at the 180 to 200 texts per day, it is correlated, one study suggests, with precocious sexual behavior, with drug and alcohol experimentation, stealing. I'm not saying that it's the texting that causes that, but something about those hyper-social, connected kids is facilitating some negative things between them and other kids. Kids average 7 to 8 hours of screens a day, Kaiser Family Report. It's just astonishing, like, maybe because they're not sleeping a full night, but this does not include what they do at school. You go to the museums, you're not going to see a ton of screens all over the place in your face telling you things. It's literally, you're going to learn eyes, ears, nose, mouth, touch. It's all going to be real and multisensory. Look at this statistic. Educational games. We like the fact that maybe really young kids can learn how to write, or that they can learn how to read through the really clever, amazing games that are popping up on iPads. So no, a lot of parents are buying them and using them, and it seems to work, and that all sounds great, except for their interest in educational screen use just plummets with age. Let me show you with this. I apologize using a graph after you've had some wine, but it's the best way to explain this. 2 to 4-year-olds, on average, minutes per day on a screen are about like almost 2 hours, 120 minutes. And that blue part is educational screens. So they're on for about 2 hours, including things like Sesame Street TV and videos. But the bulk of it is educational. By the time they get up to 8 to 10 years old, the education stuff just starts to go away. So they are on screens more, and the proportions are a lot less. And guess what? I don't have it here, but as you start to go up the ladder, once you get into like 13, 14, 15, there's nothing educational that they intentionally go at. It just doesn't exist, and they exponentially increase the amount of time on screens. So I'm starting to wonder, are we making a mistake here by running and getting these things and conditioning little kids to sit, attend to a screen, not look at other people, and move their fingers around? It's fun. I do it. Kids are naturals at it. They need to learn the skills, right? But are we accidentally conditioning them early on so that they just continue with it later? I think the answer is probably yes. Be on the lookout for that. Here's some other things about the Discovery Museum. In my practice, and in pediatric practices, in clinics, we see this thing that's very seasonal. I call it indoor fatigue. But our summers, if you want to find a child psychologist, I'm probably not going to be in my office in the summer. Come find me on a beach. The phone doesn't ring. September rolls around, what happens? The phone rings off the hook. Of course, phones don't ring off hooks anymore. I'm dating myself. Then it climbs, and it climbs, and it climbs. And then it kind of goes down a little bit right before the holidays because everybody's really busy and preoccupied and the calls aren't coming in. And then it shoots through the roof right after the first. And then it sort of does like a little bit of like a ski slope thing down. And then around like early spring, shoots back up for one last jiggle. One last, things are falling apart. Teachers are pushing really hard. It's all related to the ebb and flow of the seasons, the lack of light, and the pressure that kids are under. We see it as, this is what they come in with. He's irritable, he's sluggish. He's not sluggish, he's hyperactive. I can't calm him down. He's not sleeping at all. I can't get him to get into bed. He's tired in the morning. He's not cooperative at school. If you are in the middle of these difficult months, think about places indoors where kids could move around a lot and they could do things in a multi-sensory way and they could actually be learning things that excite them, such as the Discovery Museums. Why aren't we going more often? Why aren't we going several times? One could often say, this is something that we need to start prescribing. Time indoors in places that really work and not in front of screens. The other thing too, and it was Neil that pointed this out to me, that when you go there and you watch kids, they are dealing with other kids they don't know, they have never met, but they have to learn how to get along with other kids and share and learn new concepts and talk about them. And that is actually what they're going to need once they hit school. A lot of our referrals, these kids come in and they're not getting along with other kids. Why? Because they don't have other siblings. Or they have only had one-on-one instruction, mostly from a parent, telling them, okay, here's your card, now do this, or now we do that. And then that's never going to transfer to school. It turns out that, and Neil's right, when you look at what these kids are doing, they have to develop sort of a social component of learning. And again, that can only happen in real life at places like this. I'm going to finish off with 8 steps to building confidence in boys. These first 3 are ones that I've sort of chunked together. The first one, you're great. Stop around 8. In other words, you know how you're always telling your kids how great they are and everything they do is wonderful and you want to put on the refrigerator and it's just the best thing you've ever seen. Pump them up, pump them up, pump them up. Great. Just, knock yourselves out, people. But there's a developmental age at which they're going to look at you like you're crazy. And I get it too. Sometimes on the way out, kids will look at me like, why are you saying that? Or you let me win at Battleship. I'm like, ooh, good for you. You just went, from Piaget's pre-operational to concrete. I don't say it out loud, but, well, there you go. Make a little note. Wow, there you go. And at that point, they know too many of the things going on around them. They become really great observers, and they start to tally things up, and they start to say to themselves, wait a minute, how can I be great at everything? Is that really possible? Why is it I'm only great at home, but when I go to school, I'm not that great? That's science. That's the beginning of science, isn't it? The experimental condition, the control condition, that's when they become really true scientists. So, back off, stop the pumping up of the self-esteem, sitting there like a flat tire, doing it over and over. It's absolutely going to come back and bite you where down the road. Doing trumps telling and showing, and again, you want them literally experimenting and doing things by themselves. Don't tell them about it, don't show them, which is a lot of what we do in education. It's a lot of what parents do. Risk-taking is good. Risk is not a 4-letter word, or it is, but it's not that 4-letter word. It's not a bad thing. You hear risk, people automatically think lawyers and this is bad, and we've got liability, and we've got to minimize this. We end up sanitizing things. Now this little guy is going down these colored steps on his own. Terrific. There's not a parent hovering. Even if he topples down a little bit, it's not going to be the end of the world. Learning, experimenting, feeling on one's own. It's a beautiful photograph, I think, of this. Let them fail. You can't learn unless you fail. Fail's another 4-letter word, I guess. You can't learn. Learning requires making mistakes, regrouping, moving on to the next level. I like them on my head. I don't like the Duplos on the board. This is the point at which parent or educator steps in and says, honey, they go here. Let me show you. You put them here. I like them on my head. They feel good on my head. Look at them on my head. This, again, is the point where we feel obligated to step in and change something. Please don't overprotect or micromanage, because you're actually robbing them of the experience they need to learn. Don't always try to teach. Don't make everything a lesson. Parents are always making everything a lesson, right? Teachers are making everything a lesson. If you are the type that you can't help yourself, drop everything, step away from the child. I can think of no other way to say it. I think it's a legal issue at that point. Just stop it. Catch yourself and stop it. This one, number 5. And actually, of all the nuggets of things you might want to take with you tonight, this one is one of the best. It comes from Carol Dweck's work out at Stanford and formerly New York City. Rewarding effort, not only achievement. If you're really looking at the long haul of getting your kids, boys in particular, resilient to the disappointments of life, don't spend a lot of time congratulating them when they get to the end point and they achieve, which is what we do. Yeah, you made it, that's great, awesome, you got a goal. It's fleeting, it feels good, but actually what they need if they're going to be able to deal with disappointment is all the times they don't get a goal. Now, I don't mean that you go in there and you just make them think they're great when they're not. But give them credit for trying. Just do that a lot. And share your experiences of your failures, which parents and teachers never do. Now, in the office, I'll tell you something that I'll do that kind of combines these. Let's say, for example, you have a kid who's maybe a high school basketball player, playing JV again, wants to make varsity. It's looking like junior year is not going to make it again, and stays at this, even though the coach doesn't seem to like him and is just really struggling. What I'll say to that kid is something like this. I don't know how you do it. I'm amazed how last year you did it and this year you're doing it again. You are making a decision to keep yourself in this. I couldn't do it. If I were your age, I probably could never do something like this. I got to give you a lot of credit. That's amazing. That's rewarding effort. And then, by the way, I stop and put a period on it, and I back away. Back away from the child. It's at this point, critical point, that you may do some of that, but what do you do as a parent?
Overtalk.
Yeah, and then you make a lesson. Now it's going to become, and this is why, when I was younger, and I worked really hard, and you can too, you will, and at that point, game over. You're going to get tuned out. You have to stop. If you don't create space, they can't think for themselves. There's this particular item or exhibit which is made of pretty simple materials. And along the top is like a sort of a area where you can drop like 100 ping pong balls in. They, on slants, will come down and run through all of these little lucite nubbies, and they make really cool sounds. And there's a glass on this side so that they stay in there. And you watch them sort of go, and they collect at the bottom. And at the bottom, if you think about it, or look at it, most of them are in the middle. And as we go off to the edges, there's less and less. I wish I had this when I was taking freshman statistics. And I do talk about my failures. One of them was, I knew I wanted to be a psychologist from the get-go. And I hit my education hard running with it, and I hit statistics, and my first quiz was a D. I ended up teaching statistics, experimental design, at the graduate level and undergraduate level. Not very well, but I did. I mastered it. But it was a slog. It was horrible. Had I had something like this as a kid to play with, if I had gone someplace and seen this, I would have learned how bell curves work, how probability worked. It's a beautiful, amazing, interactive thing that starts off just as complete sound and play. Isn't it cool that they all go down there and they do that? And you do it a few times, and every kid starts to want to do it over and over, and every time they visit, they want to see it. And lo and behold, at the bottom, you start to see the pattern. The bell curve begins to build. Number 7, consider developmental age, not just chronological age or grade. Boys are harshly judged very, very early. We tend to just sort of lump kids into, oh, it's a boy or it's a girl. How old are they? The developmental differences for boys are astonishing week to week, month to month, within a year. Girls tend to have a little bit more of an even road, particularly in the early years of their development, their cognitive development. So always sort of plot where your kid is. Are they a young 6, an older 10? This is a great photo. I'm a bug, and I am squishing myself up against the glass. This is what I do. I'm like a bug on a windshield. I'm at the Discovery Museums, and this is what I do. Look at the boy behind him. This little guy is probably, this is sort of an unintentional photograph in a way of a great developmental leap. This boy is probably in his sort of 3 to 5 range, maybe, 4-ish. This is how he learns. Boys have to literally press themselves up against boundaries, and they have to do it in a physiological, concrete way. This is how they learn about the universe. It's real. It isn't told to them. It's experienced directly. By the time you get to the other boy, who's probably in the 7, 8, 9-ish range, I can't really tell, he is now turned around, he's looking at this exhibit. Is this volcanoes or weather?
Yeah, weather.
Weather. And he's actually looking at some things about it. But this is one of those moments where a lot of parents will come in, or teachers, and they will take that boy and they will twist him around. Don't. Finally, let them find and let them have their power. Boys love power. They're attracted to the cues of power. You raise your voice, they look up. You say things in staccato, quick words. You make quick, bulleted eye contact. They get it. They love it. They respond to it. They love power. But there's different types of power. Look at this boy. All along his schooling days, he was an average student. He was a small, quiet boy who disliked sports. Hapless, unattractive youth whose only distinction was a marked fear of the dark. He himself pointed out his unusually large ears. Does not sound like anyone who was ever powerful. It's Gandhi. Of course, this is a different type of power. Let them have their power. Let them decide what their power is. And it's not necessarily going to be sports. It's not necessarily going to be, when we think about alpha characteristics of males, it's not going to be about physical prowess, or the first, or the best, or the most powerful, or the fastest. And don't forget, your daughters need science too. Thank you for inviting me. I want to thank the Discovery Museum for an incredible tour and an incredible night. I want to thank you guys as much too.